Welcome to Libyth. Today we're going into the center of the Tsurezuregusa, the argument that impermanence is not just a condition to be accepted, but an aesthetic principle, and that the ending of things is not despite their beauty, but the source of it. This is a position that sounds easy to agree with, and is very difficult to actually inhabit. Most of us operate with an implicit preference for permanence, for things that last, relationships that endure, achievements that are not erased, objects that do not break or fade. This preference is so embedded in ordinary psychology that it tends to feel natural rather than chosen, as if wanting things to last were simply what having a self means. And it is reinforced at every level of the cultures most of us live in. We are rewarded for building things that last, celebrated for achievements that endure, encouraged to acquire objects that resist decay. The preference for permanence is not just a psychological default. It is a cultural project. Kenko's essays are, among other things, a sustained argument that this project is based on a misreading of what the world actually is, not a moral failing exactly, but a failure of perception, a systematic misunderstanding of where beauty actually resides, which produces a systematic misallocation of the attention that is the only resource a finite life actually has. The cherry blossom is his central case, and it is worth following in detail. The Japanese word for cherry blossom viewing is hanami, flower viewing, and it refers to a practice that was already ancient in Kenko's time, already embedded in the ritual calendar of aristocratic life. The gathering beneath the blossoming trees, the poems composed about the falling petals, the awareness that the bloom will last only days. This was not casual appreciation, but a structured practice of attention, a ritual designed around the specific quality of feeling that the brief bloom generates. Kenko is not inventing the cherry blossom's significance. He is analyzing it, asking why the cherry blossom has this specific importance in Japanese culture rather than some other flower. And his answer is that the importance derives entirely from the brevity. The bloom lasts less than 2 weeks in most years. The window of full bloom is narrower still, perhaps 3 to 5 days before the petals begin to fall in earnest. And during that window, the blossoms are already falling. You can watch them fall even at the peak, carried by the slightest wind, settling on the ground and on the water. The peak of the bloom and the beginning of the fall are simultaneous. The beauty is inseparable from the ending. You cannot have one without the other, because the ending is what generates the specific intensity of attention that makes the bloom beautiful in the way that it is beautiful. Kenko states this directly in a passage that has become one of the most discussed in the entire text. Are we to look at cherry blossoms only when they are at their finest? Are we to look at the moon only when it is clear? He is being slightly sarcastic here. The answer is obviously no from his perspective, but the sarcasm is pointed at something real. The ordinary assumption that beauty is what is maximally present, fully revealed at its peak. He is arguing the opposite. To look at the moon only when it is clear is to miss what the moon can offer under clouds. To look at cherry blossoms only at their peak is to miss the anticipation before the opening and the particular quality of attention that the falling generates. The person who only wants the full thing, the best conditions, the maximum presence, this person is asking the world to remove exactly the conditions that generate the specific beauty they are seeking. The moon argument extends this into epistemology. The full moon, clearly visible on a cloudless night, is complete. It withholds nothing. It makes no demands on the viewer's imagination. And in its completeness, it closes. It becomes simply itself, fully available, resolved. The moon glimpsed through moving clouds is something else. Present and absent alternately, the full circle implied by the visible arc, the imagination recruited to complete what the eye cannot see. The participation this requires, the projection, the completion, is not an obstacle to the aesthetic experience. It is the mechanism through which the experience becomes fully real to the person having it. What you construct through imagination participates in you in a way that what you simply receive does not. The moon you partly imagined is, in a genuine sense, yours. It has been made partly by your own capacity for projection, your own filling in of what was withheld. The cloudless moon belongs entirely to itself. The moon through clouds is a collaboration. This principle, that withholding generates participation, and participation generates a fuller form of knowing and experiencing than passive reception, runs through every aesthetic judgment in the Tsurezuregusa. A poem that states everything directly leaves the reader nowhere to go. The poem that implies the most important thing, that creates the condition in which the reader arrives at the meaning through their own movement toward it. This poem does something to the reader that the explicit poem cannot do. It treats the reader's intelligence and imagination as active participants in the creation of meaning, rather than as recipients of preformed meaning. And the meaning arrived at through participation is genuinely held in a way that the meaning received passively cannot be. It feels like discovery rather than delivery, which means the reader owns it in a way they cannot own what was simply told to them. The worn object is the material expression of this aesthetic, and Kenko returns to it in multiple registers. Consider what the newness of an object actually is. It is the condition of not having been through time, not yet having been modified by use or encounter, not yet carrying the record of anything that has happened to it. A new bowl is purely potential, all future, no past, unmarked by the specific history that will eventually accumulate on it. This is in one sense an advantage. The new bowl is predictable, consistent, without flaw or variation. But it is also a limitation. It has not yet become anything except what it was made to be. The old bowl, cracked, perhaps repaired, darkened by decades of use, has become something beyond what it was made to be. The aging is not a deviation from the bowl's true form. It is the accumulation of the bowl's actual history, the record of everything it has encountered and survived and been modified by. To see this as mere deterioration is to misunderstand what is happening. The bowl is becoming more fully itself, more fully a thing that has existed in the world, with every mark and modification that time adds. Kenkō gives us a way to think about this that is both concrete and historically specific. The Golden Pavilion was built in 1397 by Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the third Muromachi shogun, a man of genuine cultural ambition who wanted to create something that embodied both the warrior culture's power and the aesthetic refinement that power was supposed to serve. The original structure aged. Its gold leaf faded, its wood darkened, the surrounding garden grew and changed around it. By the 20th century, it was a structure that had been in the world for 5.5 centuries, and the centuries were visible in it. Then, in 1950, a troubled young monk burned it to the ground. The reconstruction completed in 1955 is technically more accurate to the original specifications than the original had been in its last years. The gold leaf is brighter, The proportions are precise. The craftsmanship is excellent. And yet anyone who has thought carefully about Kenko's argument will understand immediately what was lost in the fire and cannot be replaced by the reconstruction. What was lost was the duration, the centuries, the specific quality of existence that comes from having been in the world for a very long time, having been seen by uncountable eyes across uncountable seasons, having accumulated in its wood and stone and metal the record of all that time. The reconstruction is a beautiful object. The original was a beautiful object that had also been somewhere for 5.5 centuries, and those are genuinely different things. The essay on the half-built house makes the argument in its most concentrated form. A man begins building a house, gets the framework up, makes real structural progress, and then, for reasons unspecified, the project stops. The frame stands open to weather, incomplete, the intended form visible in the structure without the structure having achieved it. Kenko finds this more moving than a finished house. The finished house has resolved. It is what it is, fully arrived without remainder. The half-built house is still reaching. Its intention is readable in the form. You can see what it was going to be, without that intention having been closed off by completion. It still contains the future, in the sense that what it was going to become is still imaginable, still implied by its partial form, not yet canceled by the actual. The half-built house is more alive than the finished one because it is still in process, still a becoming rather than a being. Kenko does not say explicitly that this is a description of the Tsurezuregusa itself, but the parallel is exact. A collection of essays that does not finish in the way a finished thing finishes, that remains in motion, that leaves the intention visible in the structure without resolving it into completion. This is where the aesthetic argument connects back to the Buddhist philosophical framework that shapes the entire text, and where Kenko's relationship to that framework becomes most interesting. Buddhist teaching on impermanence, anicca, the doctrine that all conditioned phenomena are in constant flux, is the doctrinal basis. But Orthodox Buddhism does not aestheticize impermanence. It does not argue that things are beautiful because they end. It argues that the perception of impermanence correctly understood dissolves the attachment that generates suffering, that the fully realized awareness of impermanence produces not intensified attention to beautiful things, but the gradual diminishment of the kind of attachment that makes the ending of beautiful things painful. Kenko takes the same perception and moves it in an entirely different direction. He does not use impermanence to dissolve attachment. He uses it to intensify attention, to argue that because things end, the present moment of the thing is its most full and real existence and deserves the most complete attention available. The impermanence is not an argument for withdrawing from the beautiful thing. It is an argument for being more fully present to it. This is aestheticized Buddhism, and the tension between it and orthodox Buddhist practice is real. The fully enlightened Buddhist practitioner has, in principle, moved beyond the specific beauty of cherry blossoms, not because they are indifferent to the world, but because they no longer cling to it in the way that makes endings painful. Kenko has not moved beyond cherry blossoms. He is more moved by them than he would be if he had, more moved precisely, because the Buddhist understanding of impermanence has made the brevity vivid rather than making him detached from it. He is in the strange position of someone for whom Buddhist doctrine has intensified worldly experience rather than diminishing it, which is probably not what the doctrine was intended to do, but which produces, in the Tsurezuregusa, Something more honest and more useful than strictly orthodox Buddhism would have made possible. A text of genuine Buddhist detachment would be less interesting than this one. It would have let go of the cherry blossoms. Kenko can't let go of them, and the inability, clearly visible, never quite admitted, is where the book lives. The treatment of old age and death in the later essays extends the principle into its most uncomfortable territory. Most writing about death, then as now, reaches for consolation. The legacy that outlasts the person, the spiritual continuation that transcends the body's ending, the sense in which what mattered survives. Kenko does not do this. He approaches old age and death with the same aesthetic he applies to everything else, looking for the specific beauty that only this condition makes available, rather than looking for a way to make the condition less disturbing than it actually is. Old age in the Tsurezuregusa is not a tragedy and not a problem to be solved. It is the face that a life shows when it has been lived for a long time, the visible accumulation of everything that has happened to the body, the marks of duration written in the flesh. The body of an old person is, in this sense, a worn object, not damaged, but carrying the record of its own history, richer and denser than the body that has not yet been through very much. This is not a comfortable way to think about aging. It is an honest one. The philosophical implication that accumulates through all of this, never stated directly, demonstrated through repeated example until it becomes visible as a shape, is that to wish for permanence is to wish for the wrong thing. It is to wish for the condition that would remove the specific beauty that impermanence makes possible. The person who wants cherry blossoms to last longer has not understood cherry blossoms, has not understood that what they love about cherry blossoms is precisely the thing they are trying to extend away from them. The person who wants the moon without clouds has not understood what the clouds are doing, is asking the moon to be less than it is when it is glimpsed, less requiring of the imagination, less demanding of participation. The person who discards the cracked bowl has not understood what the crack is, has treated an event in the bowl's history as a defect rather than as part of what the bowl now is. And the person who avoids thinking about death is not thereby living more fully. They are living less attentively, protecting themselves from the awareness that would make every moment more real by removing the frame that makes it visible as a moment rather than a stretch of undifferentiated time. That's all for today on Libyth. One new book every week. At least we try.